Billy Blitzer.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing just fine.
Joe Rigoli and Lee Lowenfish are here too. Hi, guys. Thank you for joining in. So, welcome back to the Duke Show, Billy, here on the New York Pro Scouts channel. I'm Jesse Manning from Business Lunch, and we are live on this channel every Monday and Thursday, most of the time at 4 p.m. We also record the episodes. We release them later so that everyone can watch them if they miss them. With all the exciting guests that we have. And Billy, you today are our exciting guest. Hi, Sean Clancy. You have been scouting for a long, long time, well over 30 years, for the Major League Scouting Bureau, for the Chicago Cubs. You're in the Scouts Hall of Fame, and you need to go all the way to Staten Island if you want to see your plaque. You're a Scout of the Year award winner at the New York Pro Scouts. You made an Instagram just to watch this show, so we're very appreciative. And I'm pretty sure you've known me since I was 14 years old. So, Billy, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody at home?
Well, Jesse, before I even start the interview, I'd like to thank you, Katie Donnelly, Matt Hunter, and Business Lunch Productions for putting this on. You've really helped bide everybody's time. I know you put a lot of work into it, and the Scouts really appreciate it. So, again, I'd like to thank the three of you for this.
Thank you, Billy.
And first of all, you're cheating me. 30 years of scouting. This is my 45th year.
That's true. It's 30. How long have you been with the Cubs?
38 years. I'm the longest tenured full-time baseball operations employee. I'm happy to say that. I fooled a lot of people through the years.
John Franco thinks you look like you're 100, though. So
sometimes I'm feeling like that, though. I started actually in the baseball industry while I was in college. I was 21 years old, a junior in college. I was fortunate enough, which I'll go into in a bit, about how I was found and taught how to scout by Ralph DeLullo. And I went from the Scouting Bureau and then to the Chicago Cubs, where I've been for the last 38 years. So that's really the best way to describe me. I've known nothing else but working in baseball. I guess some of my friends think I've never worked a day in my life.
That's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
So before we go any further, you know how this goes. There's a company that helps rename minor league teams. We've got some pretty crazy ones out there. There's the Billings Mustangs, the Carolina Mudcats, the Cedar Rapids Colonels. So John Franco called it the Duke Show, most saves in baseball history. So that's pretty cool for a left-hander. Billy Blitzer, we got to change it. What do we call the show?
Oh, I'm going to change it. I've given it some thought. Since this is a baseball scout show, how about if we call it the Dream Chasers?
I like that a lot.
Baseball scouts dream a lot about players, and I'll call it the Dream Chasers.
That's fantastic. So let's jump into the Dream Chasers. So you're a Brooklyn boy. You went to Abraham Lincoln High School in Coney Island. You were teammates with Lee Mazzilli. And then you went on to Hunter College, and you started off playing and then became the head coach at quite a young age. So can you talk about your formative years in baseball here in Brooklyn?
Sure. You know, as a young kid, I grew up in the streets and in the schoolyards. As a matter of fact, in Brighton Beach in PS 253. And there were about 8 or 9 of us, group of kids. We were basically the same age. And whatever season it was, that's what we played. We played softball, we played basketball, we played football. And as the season changed, you always saw me with a ball in my hand. And of course, I started Little League like everybody else at 8 years old. And when I was 15 years old, one of the guys in the schoolyard played in the parade grounds, which I had never heard of before. And he played on a team called Borough Park. And he said to me, why don't you come down? I think you're still a year too young, but I told the coach about you. I was a decent hitter. I was a pretty good player. And I went down, I tried out, I made the club. And just playing in the parade grounds, I mean, Johnny Franco talked about it the other day. The conditions of the field were terrible. There'd be holes in the mound, holes at home plate. People would dig it out. But you had to be a pretty good player just to play. And it isn't like today where everybody gets a chance. If you weren't good enough, you sat on the bench and you worked at it and you worked at it until you were good enough to be put in the lineup. And as a young kid, I didn't play at the beginning that season, but I worked my way in. And I'll tell you how competitive it was. Just off the top of my head, there were 4 players that made it to the big leagues in the years that I played in the parade grounds. You're
Wow.
talking about Lee Mazzelli and Pete Falcone played on a team Gravesend. There was a kid, Candy, who played for Parkville, who was John Candelaria, a big
Right.
handed pitcher. And then you had a little shortstop who played the middle infield for Cummings Brothers and named by the name of Willie Randolph. So those
Not
are
too
four,
shabby. You could
four
start a
pretty
team
good
with those 4.
players. Yeah, there were 4 pretty good players in the years that I played. And you know who else played? He didn't mention it, but John Taminia, one of our scouts. We played against one another. He played for Ty Cobbs. And it wasn't until later on when he was scouting, I was scouting before him, we were looking at one another at a game like we knew one another. And then we started talking. I asked him where he was from. And we realized we had played who knows how many games against one another when we were playing in the parade grounds. But from the parade grounds, you know, as you say, I'm playing in high school. I'm a senior, and every kid dreams about playing maybe in the big league, seeing yourself on a baseball card. And that dream came to a halt when I was a senior in high school because a sophomore came out for the team. This kid could fly. He had great reactions in the outfield. He switched hit, and his name was Lee Mazzilli. And I looked at him, and I didn't have to be a scout then, but I was smart enough to see that he was a lot better than the rest of us. So that dream died right there. But I went on to Hunter College, and I wanted to stay in the game somehow. And after my freshman year playing, I asked some of the kids on the team, are there any teams in the parade grounds you think that might need a coach? I'd maybe like to try coaching. So maybe when I get out of school, I would maybe coach in high school or possibly in college someplace. And they told me about a new organization in the parade grounds called Youth Service League.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down, it was youth service maybe first or second year in the parade grounds. I went down and I interviewed with Mel Zitter's dad, Herb Zitter, and he put me in charge of a team full of junior high school age kids. And after that year, the following year, I had high school kids. But it was while I was coaching this youth service team in my junior year, going into my senior year at Hunter, I was waiting to play a game in the parade grounds, and this old man sat down next to me. And I say old, I'm probably older now than what he was then, but to me, he was an old man. And there was a game going on with a team called the Raiders. And the coach of this Raiders team, believe it or not, was a man that became a famous scout. His name was Louis Rosa, who moved back to Puerto Rico. And Louis worked for the Texas Rangers and San Diego Padres. He signed the Allan brothers, and he signed a lot of players for those organizations. Well, anyway, a kid gets up on this Raider team, and I say to the old man next to me, watch this kid. He's a young kid. He's going to be a real good player. And the reason I knew the kid, he was from the schoolyard where I came from. He was younger than us, but we used to let him play because he was a good athlete. Well, this kid rips a ball in the gap, goes for a triple. He flies around the bases. And who is it? It's Dallas Williams, who a couple of years later would be a first-round pick with the Baltimore Orioles.
Yep.
So the old man says to me, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm going to coach the next game. He says, well, I'm going to watch. I said, that's okay. I don't care. So we played the game. This old guy comes down. I'm packing the equipment, and he says to me, I'd like to talk to you. I said, about what? I still don't know who he is. He says to me, my name is Ralph DeLulo, and I'm a scout with the Major League Scouting Bureau. And I said, what's that? Because it was the first year of the Bureau, and I had no idea what it was. So he explained it to me. And I said to him, who do you want to talk to me about? My shortstop? My shortstop happened to be a kid by the name of Willie Lizzato, who made it to the major leagues for a cup of coffee with the Milwaukee Brewers. And he says to me, no, I want to talk to you about you. And I said to him, I didn't play. What do you want to talk to me about? He says to me, give me your phone number, and I want you to meet me next weekend again before one of your games, and I'm going to sit and watch the game with you again. I said, why? He said, don't worry about why. Just give me your phone number. So I gave him my number. I go home, and I tell my parents what went on. I said, I don't know if this guy's a nut, a character, or he's legit. I don't know. Well, Ralph called me on a Wednesday, and I told him when we were playing. I went down to the parade grounds and met with him, and we sat there to watch the game. And as I'm sitting there, people are coming by saying hello. Towards the end of the game, Ralph says to me, well, look, I'm going to run a tryout in the parade grounds here, but you're going to select all the players. And since it was the first year of the Bureau, he says, I'm going to run 4 camps in Jersey and 2 in Long Island, and you're going to come around with me to all these camps and help me run the tryout camps. So that's how I started. I was an associate scout of bird dog for Ralph. So I was 21 years old, probably the youngest scout in the country. So then I'm playing my senior year at Hunter. And this is funny. And I told this story for years. We go up to play Pace University in Pleasantville, New York. And it was a rainy type of day. And the Coach Jones, says to me, Billy, do me a favor. You hit infield. I played the outfield in college. I played the infield when I was in high school. He said, it's a rainy day. I have to do something by my car. Do me a favor. Hit some ground balls to the infielders. Get them loose, and we'll get going. I said, okay. So I go over. I'm hitting ground balls, and I see a scout from the Mets, a part-time scout named Pete Smith, come walking in. So I see Pete coming in, and I wave to him hello because I met him at these tryout camps. And I say to one of the kids on the bench, do me a favor, give that man, he's a scout, the lineup. So he gives him the lineup. I finish hitting. I go over to the bench. And at this point at Pace, there were no dugouts. It was a snow fence in front of the bench. So Pete comes over to me. He leans over. He said, Billy, there's a mistake in your lineup card. I said, what do you mean? So I reach around. I take it from him. I look at it. I hand it back. I said, there's no mistake. He said, sure, there's a mistake. You're in the lineup. I said, of course I'm in the lineup. I'm a player. I'm only a senior. I'm going to be playing here today. So Pete, for years, would tell people that he saw me play. But the following year, the coach had left, and I was named the head coach that December of Hunter College. So now I'm the youngest scout. I'm the youngest head coach.
Yeah, how old were you when you were named the head coach?
22 years old.
Not too shabby.
So we go up to Pace that spring again, and Pete comes in. I walk over with the lineup to him. I hand him the lineup. I said, Pete, I'm not in the lineup this year. I'm not a player anymore, but I am the head coach. So that's really how I started in scouting, and I became the head coach, where I coached Hunter for 3 years.
And I guess Ralph DeLulo was legit after all, huh?
Ralph, I found out, was legit in a lot of areas, because he used to tell me stories, and at the beginning I didn't believe it until that happened. And then he took me to reward me to the New York Sports Writers Dinner that year. And there was a special cocktail hour before the dinner that you had to know somebody to get in, and Ralph knew people, so we got in. And when we walked in, before we got there, Jim Bunning was being honored. And Ralph had told me that he was Jim Bunning's first coach in the minor leagues when he was a manager in the Tiger system. Really? And I kind of blew him off. I didn't believe it. Well, let me tell you, we walked into this cocktail hour, and as soon as we walked through the door, Jim Bunning was on the other side of the room, saw Ralph, stopped what he was doing, ran across the room, threw his arms around me and said, hey, Skip, hey, Skip. So after that, I believed every story Ralph told me.
And with good reason. So you've been helping to run the show with this organization, the New York Professional Scouts Organization, for years and years. And you've been honored, like we said before, for your accomplishments as a scout. But you've also learned from people who founded this organization, like Ralph, like Herbie Stein. Can you talk about the organization itself? Why are we doing this? Why is it so important, and how it's impacted your career?
Well, the organization itself started more as a social type of thing to keep the scouts together in the off season. And when I started years ago, the first Monday after Labor Day, we used to have a big outing in Westport, Connecticut, where we'd play a big softball game, and they'd have a barbecue and a big dinner after that at night. And then in October, November, and December, we would have meetings at a place called the Brownstone in Paterson, New Jersey. And then we'd have the big dinner in January. And Herbie ran that dinner. And when I started, it used to be at Shea Stadium in the Diamond Club. And we were only able to hold maybe 120 people. And if you happened to send in your money afterwards, you couldn't come. That's the way it was. But it was more of a social type of thing. And the dinner was just to get everybody together and reward people. The Scout of the Year award is named the Turk Karam Award.
Right.
Turk Karam worked for the Topps chewing company, baseball card company. Cy Berger was one of the founding people in our organization. And Cy named this award after Turk, who was one of his friends, and he worked with him at the Topps company. And believe it or not, the first person to ever receive that award was not a scout. The first
Really?
person to receive it was Gil Hodges.
Huh.
After that, they made it a Scouts Award. And we give out a Good Guy Award, Benny Borgman, who's in the Basketball Hall of Fame, believe it or not.
Right.
And the other awards, since I've taken over the dinner, I've been running the dinner like 35, 36 years already. And I made sure to take care of the people that mentored me. One's named after Herbie, Star of the Future. We have a Ralph DeLulo Award. We have a Steve Lembo Award. Steve helped me a good deal when I started. So we have this. It really starts off the baseball season. It kicks it off. It's not a so-called dinner. It's like a big party. I try to put people together that are friends at the table. When the cocktail hour starts, it's usually over an hour because we can't get people out. Everybody's having such a good
That's
time.
the best part. The food's the best. Come
Well,
on.
I usually take my food home from the dinner. I don't get a chance to eat because I'm running around all night. But the dinner's been a big success. We've had it up to over 300 people one night. We had Tommy Lasorda. We don't pay any of our guests to come speak. We have plenty of people that we have contacts with. And we've had a who's who over the years who have come to this dinner. But the organization itself, we've had membership. It started out as you had to be a scout under contract, but as the years have gone on, we don't have as many, so we've let other people in that are associated with us, with the game, and it's really a great group of guys. That's all I can say.
And it's an amazing way to stay involved in baseball, whether you're a player, whether you're a scout, a coach, in the media, and on and on and on. So over the years, we talked about now how you were mentored and how that affected you. You've also given your time to so many younger guys who've gone into scouting from varied backgrounds, graduating students, former big leaguers. Eric Valent, I remember, you helped out get going. Talk about the importance of scouting in general to baseball and why you continue to give back.
Well, I do it to give back. So when I started, there were no young scouts. It's not like it is today. It was all older men. And I was told, and I tell the young guys today, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and keep your mouth shut. Just watch. And I was always very respectful. And I think the scouts at the time all saw that, and they saw how much it meant to me. You know, I grew up as a kid, as a fan of the game. And even to this day, I meet players, I meet scouts that were ex-players that I remember as a kid. And it's a thrill for me when I walk in the ballpark. When I walk into, let's say, the press room at Yankee Stadium or Citi Field, and I see all these people that I see on TV, and I'll walk in and everybody knows me. And I have to say, to go back from previously, to say to mentor, you know, I had Ralph DeLulo, I had Herbie Stein. I was always considered Herbie's third son. His kids would even say that. And Herbie hoodwinked me into being the dinner chairman. And I'd like to just tell you that story.
Go ahead.
It was
and Herbie Stein signed Rod Carew, right?
Robbie signed Rod Carew and Frank Viola and Gene Larkin, and Herbie was a legend himself, but he was a real character. He was a New York City transit detective, and Herbie could tell you stories. But what had happened was Herbie came over to me one day in the parade grounds during the summer. I think it was my first year with the Cubs. And he came over to me, and he had known me. I'd been working now for 7 years. And he says to me, son, you're a pretty good worker. How would you like to help me with the Scouts dinner? And I said, sure, Herbie, anything I could do to help you. So I leave it like that. We go to our meeting in October for the Scouts. We're at that brownstone in New Jersey. And the president, whoever it was at the time, says, any new business? And Herbie puts his hand up, and I'm on the opposite side of the room. I have no idea what he's going to say. Herbie puts his hand up and he says, I am resigning as the dinner chairman for the Scouts dinner. And Billy Blitzer has agreed to be the chairman. And I look across the room and I said, no, I didn't. He says to me, shh, be quiet. He says to me, Billy Blitzer is going to be the new dinner chairman. I said, no, I'm not. So he goes, let's take a vote. So he must have been in with the president, because the president goes, who's in favor of Billy Blitzer being the new dinner chairman? All the hands go up. Who's against? I'm the only one that puts my hand up. So when this meeting was over, I run over to Herbie. I said, I'd help you. I didn't say I'd run the dinner. So Herbie looks at me. He goes, listen, don't worry. I'll help you. I'll give you. To this day, I still have all the letters that he gave me. I know who to write or whatever. But what had happened was Herbie says to me, don't worry, I'll help you. And then he goes, he says to me, the big thing was, I'm going to make you famous. Everybody in baseball is going to know who Billy Blitzer is.
Clearly.
And I said to him, no, I don't want to be famous. You do it. I have no qualm to be famous.
It's like a ball and chain. You couldn't get rid of it.
I couldn't get rid of it. I said, okay. And that first year that we did it, I didn't know what I was doing. Herbie came to my home. Herbie lived in Riverdale in the Bronx, and I lived here in Seagate. And he took the subway to Coney Island, and I picked him up at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, again, I didn't know to keep records exactly how I do it now. Herbie came to my house at 10 o'clock in the morning. It started snowing that day. He left my house. I drove him to the station at 9:30 that night. We had to do everything from scratch. And after that, I learned exactly what I had to do. But that's how I got hoodwinked into being the dinner chairman. And I've done it now for like 37 years.
I think people need to be on the lookout. Anyone involved with the organization, they might
I'm
be around
looking
the
for
time
somebody.
of getting hoodwinked. Yeah.
It's about that time for me to get somebody in here.
Oh, man. So that's hilarious. You started with the Scouting Bureau we talked about. Like you, I think a lot of people probably don't even know what that is. And then you transitioned over to the Cubs, and you've been with the Cubs forever. What's the Cliff Notes version of your scouting career?
Okay, I started with the Major League Scouting Bureau. And what that is, or at the time, it came into existence as a cost-cutting measure. Most clubs had big staffs. They wanted to cut down, as they want to do today. And what they did, they formed this Scouting Bureau. And not all the teams were in it the first year. Like right now, all 30 teams were in it. But at that point, there were less teams. I remember the Dodgers, the Phillies, the Cincinnati Reds were not in it. So they wouldn't get my reports. But all the other teams, it's like the Scouting Bureau scouts were an extra scout in whatever area for all these teams. And how it started, believe it or not, they had a draft. Each club was allowed to protect 5 scouts at the beginning.
Really?
So they didn't protect the real older guys that were getting on, because they figured they wouldn't be with them that much longer. So someone like Ralph DeLullo, ironically, was with the Chicago Cubs for 25 years, was not held by the Cubs, and the Bureau selected him to work the Jersey, New York area. Up in New England, Lenny Marullo, who worked for the Cubs for 20 years, he was the shortstop for them in the 1945 World Series. He was selected by the Bureau, and Lenny worked for the Bureau up until his death as well. So Ralph and Lenny, so the Cubs had nobody in this part of the country when the Bureau began. And what had happened was they had a scout, Frank DeMoss, who lived in West Virginia. He used to go up and down the East Coast, and he called Ralph and he called Lenny, because he knew them when he worked for the Cubs, and they'd give him whatever inside information that they could. But the Bureau would go out, and you would uncover players, and then you would write the report, send it into the office in California, and they would send your reports out to the club. So it was an extra report. You never got credit for finding any players. You really never got credit. You didn't sign any players.
Right.
So I began with the Bureau. The 3 years that I was under contract, I was starting to make a name for myself. Even beforehand, I was finding players. But when I was under contract for the 3 years, I was the one that came up with Bobby Bonilla at Lehman High School in the Bronx, and Devon White at Park West High School, and Walter Weiss was up in Suffern, New York, and B.J. Surhoff was at Rye High School in Rye. And I was coming up with players, and scouts before that were afraid to come into New York. They'd come in packs. They didn't come in unless you were from the area. You'd go into areas like up in the South Bronx was bad at the time, or Betsy Head Park in Brooklyn. you know, you go into the Spanish leagues. At least I wasn't afraid. I played in some of these places. And when I coached that youth service team, a number of my players played in the Spanish league. So they would tell the coaches, listen, Billy Blitz is coming up. Just keep an eye on him. Make sure nothing happens to him. And they would send kids out to sit on my car so nobody stole the tires off the car or broke in. But it's all true, you know. But I was coming up with players making a name for myself. And then in 1982, when Sean Dunston was at Thomas Jefferson High School in Brooklyn, I was still with the Bureau. And Gary Nichols had come in as the scout for the Cubs. He was the first scout since Ralph was here, because that was the Dallas Green regime, had just started. And I had known Sean very well because he was a youth service league kid. And Mel Zitter and I made him our bat boy when he was like 14 years old, 13 years old. So he'd hang around with the older kids, and we pretty much taught him how to play. So now Sean is a top prospect. I'm working for the Bureau. I have my report in. The Cubs needed as much information. Gary and I became friends. They saw how I handled myself. And at the time of the draft, right before, the Cubs sent a letter to the Major League Scouting Bureau asking for permission for me to go in with Gary Nichols to negotiate the contract. And that's why I'm associated with Gary and say I'm one of the people. Gary and I signed Sean Dunston. I was in the house as the extra person. And then there was a whole thing that morning that we went in. We went in on a Saturday. The draft was on Monday. We had to go through the entire contract. I will never forget. It was a rainy, miserable day. It was kind of dark. At that time, you had the game of the week on NBC, and who's playing? The Chicago Cubs, ironically. And we negotiated the contract. And on Sunday morning, I was going to meet Gary at a McDonald's, and we were going to go to the Dunston home. And Gary had reserved rooms at a Sheraton in New York City to take the family, because on Monday was the draft, and we were going to be at the commissioner's office, because Sean was the first kid from New York City ever to be possibly the #1 pick in the country. So we have everything all set. I open up Sunday's paper, the New York Daily News, and Dick Young was the big columnist at the time. And in Dick Young's column was a quote from Dutch Deutsch, the man that signed Willie Randolph and John Candelaria. And Dutch said in Dick Young's column, Sean Dunston is the best player to come out of the New York area since Carl Yastrzemski.
Wow.
And when I saw that, I said, we could be in trouble. So I took the paper and I showed it to Gary when I met him at the McDonald's. We went to the Dunston household, and it was like walking into a refrigerator. They read the paper, and I could see what was happening. And as soon as we walked in, I said, Mr. Dunston, you and I, we're going in the bedroom. Just you and I are going to talk. And we spoke. And I told him, you can't believe everything you read in the paper. And it'll mean a lot that Sean's the #1 pick in the country. We spoke a little. We walked out, and he said, okay, Gary, we have a deal. So Gary left to go to the Sheraton. Mrs. Dunston and her daughter went to the beauty parlor, and I had a little Chevy Nova, and I was going to take everybody into the city to meet Gary. Now, he registered under an alias because all the reporters in New York were calling my home, calling Sean's home. It's like the Beatles. Everybody was looking for him. So I have the name. I drive to the Sheraton, which I thought was the right Sheraton, where the baseball writers have their dinner, and I've been before. And we have our overnight bags, and we go up to the room. I knock on the door, and some guy opens up the door that can't speak a word of English. He's speaking Spanish, and we have no idea. So I go down to the front desk, and I said, isn't there a person such and such registered here? And he says, no. I said, has to be. There were no cell phones then. I couldn't call him. So I said, has to be. He said, well, there's another Sheraton about 4 blocks away on 57th Street at that time, near Carnegie Hall. So he said, let me call over there. He calls over there. That's where Gary is. Well, I had paid for the parking for my car, and I wasn't pulling it out. So the Dunston family and Billy Blitzer go walking down Broadway with our luggage, and we found Gary, and the rest is history. Gary handled a press conference the next day, and Sean was the #1 pick, and that was it.
That's amazing. So you were with the Cubs for years and years. We'll talk about that in just a sec, but let's get a couple of audience questions quickly, if you don't mind. And also, there's already been a vote taken. We've got people voting to make me the dinner chairman, but you can ignore them if you'd like to.
Jesse, if you want the job, it's all yours.
You know what, Billy? You keep it for a while. So we got a question from Is That Malik? Do you guys scout New York players?
What was that?
Do you scout New York players at the Scouts organization?
Sure. All the scouts in the organization are with various clubs. And you go out and you scout the New York area, of course.
Let's see what else we got. We have one. Billy is the best, always kind and helpful to the writers. Ask him about his World Series ring. That's our next thing. So we're gonna get to the ring. Do you have it? Don't show it yet, but do you have it?
Of course I have it.
Perfect. We're gonna
I
get
came
there.
prepared. Do you want to see it?
Give me 30 seconds. And then one more other question here. Billy, it's Sal. What do you think about Jason Dominguez, the Yankees' 16-year-old international phenom? Do you know him?
I've never seen him. Matter of fact, I've been on the pro side, on the professional side for the past 10 years. So I haven't seen any high school or college games. I haven't gone into national scouting. So I've never had a chance to see him play.
All right. So, Billy, let's show everybody the ring. Let's give it the due it deserves here. So that's the Chicago Cubs 2016 World Series ring. Is there a goat on it somewhere, I think, right?
Yeah, they have all kinds of sayings. It has the W flag. They have the sayings. Everything's on there. Believe it. The score of the game, how many games it took for us to win. There's 108 years? So there's 108 diamonds. There's rubies. There's emeralds. The thing, I have small hands, so when I wear it, it really sticks out. But let me tell you, I waited a long time for that ring, so I don't mind.
Exactly right, and well overdue. So there's been at least two moments, I think, in your career for sure that brought you to tears. And I know the first one had to do with Tyler Taminia and
Yes.
the Scouts and the trading cards. So when Topps company featured you on a card with one of your biggest finds, Jamie Moyer, you got to autograph them. They went into packs. They ended up all over. And you were at a certain place in upstate New York and something happened. So why don't you tell that story?
Well, what happened in 2009, the Topps company decided they were going to select 12 scouts from around the country to honor and put in their baseball packs. And Tyler Taminia and the Gold Clang group were the ones, I think, that helped select and tell the Topps company who to put in. So what happened was they called me. They sent a representative to my home and told me I had to sign 3,000 cards. And the representative came here. I put the TV on for him, and I said, you can watch TV. I'll sit here at the kitchen table, and I'll start to sign. And he said, no, I have to sit next to you and watch you sign every card.
Oh, my God.
Well, let me tell you, it took a couple hours. I was signing and signing and signing. I said, okay, we'll break for lunch. I said, I'll sign a couple more. This way I won't have that many done after we have lunch. And by now I had a blister on my finger from signing so many cards. My fingers were crooked. And what happened? He counted, and I had signed exactly 1,500, only halfway through.
Oh, my God.
So I signed the 3,000 cards. And when I finished and he left my house, the first person I called to tell him that this had just happened, I called Jamie Moyer. And I told Jamie, and he said, how much did they pay you? I said, pay me? Nothing. I'm happy as hell that they're putting me on a baseball card. Are you kidding? That's a dream come true. And so they put him in the packs, and they went out. And I don't know if you have one, which I doubt, but I have one right here. I brought it for you to see.
That's awesome. What's on the back?
Well, on the back, it has my name, and it says I worked with Jamie Moyer, but it says here that I signed him, and it talks about Jamie whatever. So that's what had happened when they put me on the card. Now, I didn't know this, but for years, people have said that the scout should be put in the Hall of Fame, which they haven't done that as of yet, because they're always saying we're the backbone of the game and this and that. But there was such a drumbeat that the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown finally decided to make a scout exhibit a number of years ago. And when they had it, they had a big ceremony. And the Cubs had called me that time and asked me if I'd want to go up and represent the organization. And it was in the spring. And I said, you know, I can't do it. It'll screw up my schedule. So I don't think we had anybody there. But they were doing it to me, you know, to honor me, to let me go up and see this. Now, I had no idea what was in this exhibit. And I go up that fall. It was Columbus Day weekend. I take my mom and my friend Karen, and the three of us go up. And I said, look, we're going to leave the plaques and everything downstairs. We're going to go up to the scout exhibit first. And we're walking through the room, and there's different showcases. We're looking at things. And we looked at one side of a showcase, and Karen says she's going to go to the other side of the room to see something. Something caught her eye. And my mom and I walked to the other side of this cabinet, and I stopped short. And I said, oh, my God. And I started to cry. There were the 12 cards that Topps had put out in this scout exhibit. My card was in the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. So I run across the room and I grab Karen by the hand. I said, come here, I got to show you something. And she says, what do you want? I'll come in. I said, no, you got to come now. And I drag her across the room and I stopped short and I pointed the cards. I said, look, and out loud she goes, oh, that's your card. And there's a lady standing there. Now it's Columbus Day weekend, so the hall was busy. And there's a lady standing there, and she heard what she said. She looks at me, looks at the card, looks at me, looks at the card, says, sir, you're in the Hall of Fame. And by now I have tears. I'm crying. She says, don't go anyplace. I have to get my family. By now, people started coming around the cabinet, and they asked me to sign the programs. I'm autographing them. And Karen standing next to my mom, standing behind me. And as I'm signing for some lady, she goes, lady, that and 275 will get you on the New York City subway. But it was one of the proudest moments for me, you know, with something like that happening.
That's amazing. So you then were still waiting for this ring. And then finally, after all these years, you got it. What was that experience like when you finally won the ring in 2016?
Well, game 7, I was sitting at home in my living room with my mom. And my mom was in her 80s, and we're watching the game, and we scored early, and we were up like 5-0. And I'm at the point I'm counting outs. We were only like 9 outs away, I think, and the Indians started coming back. And then the home run was hit that tied the game. And when that home run was hit, you could have picked me off the floor. I was devastated. And I'm saying they always do this to me, the Cubs. You know, I said my first ring in 1984 went through Leon Durham's legs. And I never felt that Moises should have caught that ball anyway, so I never felt that. But we were ahead in that game, and they came back, the Marlins, and beat us to go to the World Series. So here we are. I'm a couple outs away, and they tie it up, and we went the extra innings. And when we won, when the ball was hit to Chris Bryant, and he threw it across the field, I jumped up yelling, we won. See, I'm getting choked up here. We won, and next thing you know, I was hysterical crying. And in the next, I'll say 7 minutes, I had over 100 texts and emails. I was up till 4 o'clock in the morning answering emails and people calling me.
Only you, Bill. That speaks to you as even in a moment where you finally get it, you're thinking about all those people that have reached out to you, and that speaks to your character, I think, more than anything else.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of on that topic, you got your ring. When Theo first took over with the Cubs, came over from the Red Sox and took over with the Cubs, you were in Arizona, I believe, for a meeting at spring training with the whole team staff. There were over 100 people there. And all of a sudden, Theo Epstein calls you to the stage. Billy Williams is on there, and he calls you up. What happened there?
Well, what had happened was we had an organization meeting in the fall. And Theo called me up. I had never met Theo. And he called me up on a Friday afternoon. And he said, the meeting was on Monday. He said, would you be able, he said, I'm going to pick a couple of people to come up and speak about what the Chicago Cub organization means to you. I said, I have no problem, not a problem. So that Monday at the meeting, he had selected 3 people. It was myself, Billy Williams, and Lester Strode, our bullpen coach. Lester had been there a little less than me as a player, and then as a coach, he came up through the. So in this room was about 150 people. Because it was the first meeting, organization meeting, we had all the secretaries and trainers and minor league managers and coaches, big league manager, coaches, all the scouts, pro scouts, amateur scouts. So we're all in this room, and they told me and Billy and Lester to sit in the front of the room. And Theo's up on the stage with Jed and Jason McLeod. And Theo gets up and he says, before I start to speak, I'm going to call on 3 individuals to talk to you what it means to work for the Cubs. And he starts to walk to us with a microphone. And I'm figuring he's going to hand the mic to Billy Williams, you know, a Hall of Famer. Well, he hands it to Billy Blitzer. He hands it to me.
Also a Hall of Famer.
Well, but, you know, I don't look at myself like that. He hands me the microphone, and I got up, and I told everybody in the room. At that point, I was with the organization 29 years, going on my 30th year or whatever. And I got up, and I told everybody that 30 years ago, whatever it was, I sat in these same seats, and I pointed out to where I was sitting. I said where Theo was sitting was Dallas Green was sitting there, where Jason McLeod was sitting. My scouting director, Gordy Goldsberry, was there. And we did the same thing then as we still do today. We go around the room, everybody gets up, introduces themselves, say who they are, where they're from, and what their job is. And when it came to me, I got up, I said, my name is Billy Blitzer. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm an amateur scout, but I added, I'm very proud to be here. And I left it like that. And I went on to tell some stories or whatever, tell a couple of jokes. But as I was finishing up my little talk, I said to everybody, I have a little story to tell you. And the story went like this. About 2 weeks previous, the New York Football Giants had won the Super Bowl. And a friend of mine called me up that day. They were going to have the parade in the city. And it was a beautiful day. It was like 48 degrees in January or whatever to have a parade. He called me up and he said, Billy, come on, let's go to the city. Let's go see the parade. I said, no, I'm not interested. I'm not going. He says, come on, we're going to go to the parade. It's a beautiful day. I said, I'm not interested. I'm not going. He said, why not? I said, the only parade I'm interested in is when the Cubs win the World Series, there's going to be a parade in Chicago, and I'm going to be not only there, I'm going to be in it.
Right.
And I told that to everybody. And with that, I put my left hand in the sky. I held it up, and I said to everybody, I pointed at my left hand, the ring finger, and I said, see this hand? No ring. I've been here for 30 years. I have nothing to show for it. And I don't have another 30 years to give. So you got to get us going and put a ring on this finger. When I said that, the room exploded. Billy jumped up and hugged me. Theo came off the stage and hugged me. And I guess it's in Cub lore. If they ever make a movie about Theo, they're going to have somebody play me because that scene will be in the movie.
You never know. It happened with Moneyball. It could happen with the Cubs.
It could happen.
So let's do a couple of more audience questions here. Sean Clancy, is there one that got away?
Oh, yeah. There's, you know, if you're a good scout, you know, you have successes, but there's always players. And the one that I always talk about when I'm asked that question is Rich Aurelia. Rich Aurelia went to Zavarian High School, which is close to my home. He played for Gil Hodges and Our Lady of Grace, which is right near my house. I saw him play there. I saw him play at St. John's University. He was a 20th or 24th round pick by the Texas Rangers, and the 2 scouts that signed him happened to be Omar Minaya and Brian Lamb with Texas at the time. And after Rich signed, they must have made some adjustments because he never hit for me. He could always field and throw, but he never hit, at least for me. And when he went to the minor leagues, all of a sudden he started to hit. And I saw Omar at a game like a year later or whatever. And I said, kidding around, would you sprinkle fairy dust on that kid? And Rich went on to be an all-star in the big leagues. And you know, even to this day, even if I didn't sign a kid, if he's a local kid, whether he be from New York or from New Jersey, you root for the local kids to get to the big leagues. So, you know, God bless them. But that's one that got away.
Absolutely. We got 2 here. One from C. Cabrera. What's going on? A lot of high school seniors not being able to play this year. What should be their next step? And then Catherine Clahane. Billy, any thoughts on this year's draft?
Well, I have no idea what's going on the amateur side with that, but they're talking about the draft in July. I guess they are going to have it. They're not sure how many rounds. They're talking definitely 5, maybe 10. And as far as what the seniors can do, the scouts are going to have to go by what they've seen in the past. There was nothing that you can do as a senior to be seen unless they hold some sort of tryout camp before the draft. But with everything going on, I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't think anybody else has any idea what's going to happen as far as being able to play and showcase yourself.
One more fan question here. Question for Billy. Where in New York do you scout the most?
Well, again, I said I'm on the pro side for the past 10 years, but before that, my area would be from the Canadian. I first started out from the Canadian border all the way down to Washington, D.C. I had New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, D.C. Then later on, I cross-checked. Then I went back to being an area scout, and I had New York, New Jersey, New England. So, basically, you're in the Northeast is what you are. And that's what most of the scouts are today. They basically have the Northeast.
So we're doing rapid fire, but for you, I'm going to mix in some people who I know you have good stories about. So we'll start with what's your favorite ballpark?
In the big leagues or in the minor leagues?
Either one other than Wrigley Field.
Okay. Minor leagues, for some reason, I've always liked Reading. It's an older park. They keep it up. The fans are great. And it's always a fun place to go to. Other minor league parks, Lehigh Valley, which is close by, is a new park pretty much. It's a great park. And down in Charlotte, Charlotte's AAA Park is big league. Major League Park, believe it or not, I kind of like to go to Citi Field. I like the park in Philadelphia. I like to go there to watch a game.
Gary Perone, what?
There's always the Brooklyn Cyclones too. That's the closest one to my home.
Exactly. You can walk.
And I do tell people about that ballpark.
Paul Simon story.
Oh, Paul Simon story. I am sitting in the old Yankee Stadium. I'm sitting on the aisle watching the Toronto Blue Jays play the New York Yankees. I had Toronto's organization and the Yankees. And Roger Clemens happens to be pitching for the Blue Jays. So it was about the 4th or 5th inning. And Roger just finished. I'm putting my notes. I happen to look up, and walking up the aisle, somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, "Hey, what's he throwing?" I look up, and it's Paul Simon. And I said, "Oh, he's 92 to 96. He goes, "Oh, okay." He says, "What about his slider?" So I tell him what the velocity on the slider is. And he says, "Who you with?" I said, "I'm with the Chicago Cubs." He says, "Oh, you live in Chicago?" And I came out with the best line of my life. He says, "Oh, you live in Chicago?" I said, "No, I live near Julio down by the schoolyard. I'm from Brooklyn." And he started laughing. He hit me in the shoulder. He said, "Yeah, you're from Brooklyn."
Amazing. All right. Favorite fruit?
Honeydew. I'm not a big fruit eater, but I'll say honeydew.
The last time I interviewed you at your house, your mom fed us honeydew. So that isn't a surprise.
There you go.
What's your favorite Broadway show? You're a big theater guy.
I've seen so many shows over the year. I kind of like musicals. I'll go with Jersey Boys, Beautiful, something like that.
And then finally, do you have a George Brett story?
I do, believe it or not. I met George Brett at a minor league park up in Norwich, Connecticut, when it was the Yankees AA club. He was with a good friend of mine, Brian Murphy. Brian worked for Kansas City, was a big scout in their organization, and George was with him. And I don't know who they were looking at, but we went out for dinner right after the ball game. I was talking with him, so I was all excited. I brought a baseball to the ballpark the next day to have George sign it for me. He told me he would. Well, I come the next day, and I said, "Brian, where's George?" He said he got a call last night after we got back to the hotel, and he had to leave. So I was kind of disappointed. About a month later, I'm at Shea Stadium, and Art Stewart, longtime scouting director, and he's in the Kansas City Royals Hall of Fame. Art Stewart's at the game, and I said, "Art, where you staying?" And he said, "I'm staying at the Marriott over here." I said, "You need a ride back?" He said, "I was going to take a taxi." I said, "No, I'll drive you back." So I tell him that I ran into George and Brian about a month before, and I was going to get George's autograph, and he left. I just didn't get it. He says, "Give me your card. Give me your address. Don't worry." I gave him my card, and about 2 weeks later, I get a package in the mail with a ball autographed in a case and everything. Art Stewart got him to autograph a ball, and they sent it to me.
That's awesome. So we've got probably like 8 minutes left on this before it ends, but I know, Billy, you've got a ton more stories. If you're not doing anything, once we're done, we can start up and we can finish telling some more stories for anyone who wants to come back.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
All right. So let's just go to the baseball cards then, and we'll do the rest of the things on the next one. So I'm going to show you cards now. We're kind of already doing this, but first one, Craig Biggio, what comes to mind for you?
Oh, I've got a good story, which I've told you. I went to see Craig Biggio when he was in high school, right before the draft. I was with the Major League Scouting Bureau at the time, and Biggio had a scholarship to Seton Hall, so he wasn't really a priority to go see. From what I had heard, he wasn't really ready to go out, and he was going to go to Seton Hall. So I had found out that he was going to play on a Saturday morning out in Long Island, and he lived way out in Kings Park.
Right.
He was going to play with a Sandlot team at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I get up and I leave early and I drive out, and there's about 3 other scouts at this game, and we're sitting behind home plate, and there's no Biggio. We're waiting for him, and the Sandlot coach assured us that he was going to be there. He promised us that he would be there. The problem was he had the prom before. It was on that Friday night. And as we're sitting there, it's about 5 to 9. The game's going to start at 9 o'clock. And the road to the ballpark, the parking lot was in right field. So the road to the ballpark came from left field to center field, and you had to go to right. Well, about 5 to 9, a big limo comes down this road, stops in center field. The door swings open, and Biggio jumps out of this huge limo with his bag that had a glove and spikes in it. He's wearing a tuxedo. The shirt is open, no tie. He hops over the fence. He comes running in towards the first base dugout, taking off his clothes as he's running in, put his uniform out, and ran out to shortstop to start the game.
Unbelievable.
It was unbelievable.
All right. You mentioned him, Jamie Moyer.
Jamie Moyer. Well, I have a lot of story when he was in the major leagues that involves a New York Met. And what the story was, Jamie was pitching for the Phillies. And when he would come into town with the Mariners or the Phillies or whoever it was, we would speak to one another. And if I was in town, we would go for dinner if it was a day game on a Saturday or whatever. So he called me up, and Jamie was pitching Friday night, and we were going to go out on Saturday. So I happened to be scouting the Mets. So he just asked me who's hot, who's not. So I told him at the time, David Wright's really swinging the bat very well. And David's power is to right center. When he's going good, he'll go with the pitch that way. So I told Jamie, whatever you do, don't pitch him away. Don't throw your changeup away, because if he hits it, he's got power. He's going to hit it over the right field fence. So he goes, okay, no problem. Friday night, go to the ballpark. I'm sitting behind the plate, maybe 10 rows back, and it happens to be no fans or anybody in front of us, the scouts. And David Wright comes up in the first inning. And it had to be the first pitch. He went way outside. Then he came in, and then he tried coming in again. But he didn't get the ball in enough on David. And David hit a ball over the picnic area, over the left field fence. And as he hit the ball, Jamie didn't even turn around to look. All he did was look straight ahead, staring at me. And I know he's looking at me. He's going, "You son of a bitch," And I'm laughing. I'm sitting there. And when the game was over and he got taken out, he lasted pretty good into that game. When the game was over, I called him up on his cell phone in the clubhouse, and I said, "Listen, don't blame me. It's your fault. You didn't get it in far enough."
Last one. We'll do the rest in a couple minutes. Frank Cattle and Otto.
I don't have much to say. I saw Frank play in high school. He was on a high school team with 3 other players that we happened to see, but he could swing the bat pretty well. And a scout by the name of Ramon Pena drafted Frank. And like I said, he was a Long Island kid drafted out of high school.
All right. So let's talk quickly about the quarantine, and that'll be something else we can get to in a couple minutes. What is the best thing that's happened to you? You've been stuck at home. you've had a crazy kind of experience here. What's the best thing that's happened?
Nothing. The best thing that's happened, you get to clean out drawers. I found some old reports and clean out the garage and found some other things I didn't know I had or remembered that I had. But other than that, it's been a little tough. Thank God I'm in a house where I can move around a little. I live down near the beach, so I can go for a walk on the boardwalk and back. But I'm not out much. They tell us older people to stay in, so I'll go shopping at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, get to the supermarket and come running back home.
Let's see, one more question from the audience here. So Lenny Kosberg, do pro scouts pay much attention to indie or minor leagues?
Do most scouts, pro
Do
scouts?
pro scouts pay attention to independent leagues or minor leagues at all?
Oh, absolutely. Because most of my work is in the minor leagues. Matter of fact, my best work is probably they have me scout the lower levels before players become known. You get them thrown into trades, and some of these kids develop and blossom before people really see what they are. And independent league, absolutely. There are players that have been signed. Last year, I was assigned to go to an independent league all-star game that was played up in Rockland County, the Rockland Boulder Stadium. So they're definitely scouted. There's no doubt about it.
What's the who's the most impactful player you've seen that came from the indie leagues in recent memory?
I can't tell you offhand. I really don't remember. I mean, I see so many players.
That's true, and you remember them all too. I read an article and they were saying it's unbelievable. Every time I call Billy, he remembers that player on command.
I can't tell you what I ate yesterday, but I'll tell you something, a story like I've been saying that something happened 30 years ago, 35 years ago.
So thank you, everybody. We'll cut it here, and then we're going to be jumping back on. We'll tell a couple more stories for everybody that wants to tune in, but this is the Dream Catchers, and we're going into extra innings here with the
Dream
Chasers.
Chasers.
Dream Chasers. There you go. We're going into extra innings with that, so we'll be back on in just a minute. Thank you to everybody that tuned in. All right. See you in a minute, Billy.